The judge only needed one name in the child's file to go pale, because the man sitting behind the mother wasn't just a witness. He was the father the court was never supposed to discover. Where are you listening from today? Tell me in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more Mafia romance stories. The courthouse smelled like old paper and polished wood. Elena hated that she noticed things like that when she was nervous. The scuffed marble floors, the faint echo of heels down the hallway, the way fluorescent lights flattened every face into something tired and too honest. Routine hearing, her lawyer had said. Temporary custody adjustment. Clarify visitation. Nothing dramatic. Routine. She tightened her grip on her son's backpack, even though he wasn't with her. He was at school. Safe, she told herself. Surrounded by teachers, by locked doors, by rules that didn't bend for powerful men. This wasn't about him knowing anything. It was about making sure he never had to. Elena? Her attorney, Mr. Kaplan, approached with a folder tucked beneath his arm and an expression that tried too hard to be reassuring. We're first on the docket, he said quietly. His side is pushing for expanded weekends. They're claiming you've been uncooperative. Her jaw tightened. I haven't denied a single court-ordered visit. I know, Kaplan replied, but they're implying instability. She let out a hollow breath. Of course they were. Her ex had always preferred strategy over shouting. Bruises you couldn't photograph. Words that sounded reasonable until you tried to explain how they felt. She's anxious. She isolates the child. She won't disclose certain relationships. Relationships. The word sat like a landmine. I'm not unstable, she said softly. I know, Kaplan repeated. Just stay calm. Let me handle it. Stay calm. Elena nodded and stepped into courtroom 4B. It was smaller than she expected. No jury box, just rows of wooden benches and a raised desk where the judge would sit. The state seal hung behind it, heavy and unimpressed. Her ex was already there. Mark stood near his attorney, suit pressed, hair perfectly styled. He didn't look angry. He looked composed, concerned, like a man forced to protect his son from a difficult mother. When he saw her, he gave a tight smile. You didn't have to make this hard, he said as she passed. She didn't respond. That had always been his power, plausible reason. Kaplan guided her to their table. Don't engage. She folded her hands together, focusing on the small scar near her thumb. A memory from years ago. A life ago. She had buried that life. Buried the man who belonged to it. No one in this room knew that part of her. No one would. The door at the back of the courtroom opened. It wasn't loud, but it was deliberate. Conversations softened without anyone realizing why. Elena felt it before she saw him. That shift in the air. The subtle recalibration of space around a presence that didn't ask permission to enter it. Her spine went rigid. No, he wasn't supposed to be here. Dark suit. No tie. Hair shorter than she remembered. Older, sharper. Control wrapped tight around something far more dangerous. He didn't look at her immediately. He scanned the room once, measured exits, distances, faces. Then his eyes found her. And didn't move. Her breath caught painfully in her chest. Kaplan followed her gaze. Do you know that man? She swallowed. No. The lie tasted like blood. He walked down the aisle slowly, unhurried. No visible security. No theatrics. But people shifted as he passed. Not consciously. Instinctively. He stopped at the back row. Didn't sit beside her. Didn't approach. Just remained there. Present. Mark's attorney leaned toward him and whispered something. Mark turned, annoyed at first. Then he saw who it was. Color drained from his face. What is he doing here? Mark muttered under his breath. Elena's pulse thundered in her ears. The judge entered. All rise. They stood. Elena forced herself not to look back again. Routine hearing. Nothing dramatic. The judge, a woman in her late 50s with sharp glasses and sharper eyes, flipped through the file in front of her. Temporary custody modification, she read. Mr. Reynolds is requesting additional overnights due to concerns about the mother's conduct. Elena's hands went cold. Mr. Reynolds? The judge said evenly. You're alleging instability. On what grounds? Mark cleared his throat. Your Honor, my son deserves transparency. I've reason to believe there are influences in his life that haven't been disclosed. Kaplan stood smoothly. Objection to vague insinuations. Sustained, the judge replied. Be specific. Mark hesitated. Then his eyes flicked, just briefly, toward the back of the courtroom. Toward him. Elena felt it like a blade sliding between her ribs. There's a man, Mark said carefully. A powerful one. My son's school received a large donation recently. Cars. Security. I have reason to believe my ex-wife is associating with individuals who could put our child at risk. A ripple moved through the courtroom. The judge adjusted her glasses. Name? Silence. Mark swallowed. Elena! Kaplan warned under his breath. She didn't move. The judge followed Mark's line of sight. Slowly. Deliberately. Until her gaze landed on the man in the back row. Recognition flickered. Not personal. Public. One name connected to headlines, foundations, corporate filings, and rumors no one ever proved. The judge's expression didn't change, but her posture did. And you are? She asked calmly. He didn't hesitate. Allesio Moretti, he said. The name settled over the room like a dropped glass. Mark's attorney went pale. Elena's heart stopped. I'm here, he continued, voice steady, controlled, because the allegations being made today indirectly concern me. You're not listed in this custody matter, the judge said. No, he agreed. But I believe I should be. Kaplan turned slowly toward Elena. What is happening? He whispered. She couldn't answer, because the truth was clawing its way toward daylight. And she had spent 8 years making sure it never did. The judge flipped another page in the file. Interesting, she murmured. Her eyes moved across medical documents, amendments, emergency contact forms that had been updated recently after the school's new sponsorship. One name, one signature, one blood type that matched a donor registry the court had sealed years ago. The judge looked up again, first at Elena, then at the man in the back. And for the first time, the hearing no longer felt routine. It felt explosive. Elena Reynolds, the judge said carefully, is there anything you would like to disclose to this court before we proceed? The room held its breath. Mark stared at her, triumphant. Allesio didn't move, didn't pressure, didn't claim. He simply watched her like a man who had already decided something irreversible. And in that silence, Elena understood with bone-deep clarity. She hadn't lost control of the hearing. She had lost control of the secret. And secrets, once dragged into a courtroom, did not go quietly. The silence didn't break. It stretched. Elena could hear the faint hum of the courtroom lights above her, the shuffle of paper as the judge adjusted the stack of documents in front of her. No one coughed. No one whispered. Even Mark seemed to sense that whatever came next would not belong to him. The judge slid a thin folder from beneath the larger custody file. This, she said slowly, was attached to the emergency motion filed last week. Kaplan stiffened beside Elena. Your Honor, we were not notified of any supplemental filings. You were, the judge replied calmly, but it was sealed. Sealed! The word struck like a match. Elena's pulse began to pound in her ears. The judge opened the folder carefully, almost thoughtfully, as if aware she was about to disturb something that had been buried on purpose. Amended birth certificate, she read, filed 6 months after initial record. Elena's throat closed. No, she had handled that herself. Quietly, carefully, paid cash. asked questions without sounding like she was afraid of the answers. There appears to be a missing paternal signature, the judge continued. The line was left blank on the original certificate. On the amended copy, the space remains blank, but the document number references a suppressed hospital report. Kaplan turned to Elena slowly. "Did you amend the birth record?" he whispered. She couldn't speak. The judge lifted another sheet. St. Catherine's Medical Center. Labor during severe storm event. Power failure reported. Backup generators engaged. Elena felt the memory slam into her without mercy. Rain against the windows. Dark hallways. A nurse whispering that some systems were down. A man she loved nowhere near her because she had told him not to come. The hospital report, the judge continued, indicates that a man arrived shortly after delivery, asking to be listed as emergency contact. The room shifted. Elena's hands began to shake. That request, the judge said evenly, was denied by the mother. Every eye in the courtroom moved to her. Kaplan's voice was barely audible. "Elena!" She stared at the wood grain of the table in front of her, fighting to keep her breathing steady. "I'm also seeing," the judge went on, "a notation flagged, but never escalated. A blood type discrepancy." The word blood made something primal tighten in her chest. "The child's blood type," the judge clarified, "is AB negative." She paused. "The mother's documented blood type is O positive." Kaplan's breath hitched beside her. "And while rare combinations exist," the judge said, adjusting her glasses, "the hospital flagged the discrepancy pending paternal confirmation. That confirmation never occurred." The room felt too small, too bright. Mark leaned forward suddenly. "Your Honor, what exactly are you implying?" "I'm not implying anything," the judge replied sharply. "I am stating facts contained within sealed documentation that, frankly, should not have required this court to reopen." She turned another page. "There is also an internal memo from hospital administration referencing outside pressure to suppress follow-up testing." Elena's stomach dropped. Outside pressure. She didn't need to look back to know whose world that phrase belonged to. "Pressure from whom?" Mark demanded. The judge's eyes flicked toward the back of the courtroom. "Elena Reynolds," she said carefully. "Did you request that the hospital omit paternal information from the record?" Elena swallowed. "Yes." "Why?" "Because I thought it would save him. Because I thought it would save all of us. Because love and violence don't mix. Because it was my right," she said quietly. The judge studied her for a long moment. "Rights," she said slowly, "do not negate biological fact." The folder closed softly, then opened again. "Additionally," the judge continued, "this court received an affidavit yesterday from Mr. Moretti's legal counsel requesting a voluntary DNA confirmation under seal." The room erupted in murmurs. Kaplan turned to her, stunned. "He filed for paternity?" "I didn't know," she whispered, but even as she said it, she realized that wasn't true. She had known the moment he walked into the courtroom. He had not come to intimidate. He had come prepared. Mark shot to his feet. "This is outrageous. He's not even listed as a party." "He may become one," the judge cut in sharply. Silence fell again. The judge looked toward the back of the room. "Mr. Moretti." He stood without hesitation. No performance, no raised voice. Just presence. "Did you request access to sealed hospital documentation?" "No, Your Honor," he replied calmly. "I requested confirmation through proper legal channels once I became aware of the inconsistencies." "Inconsistencies you discovered how?" His gaze shifted briefly to Elena, then back to the bench. "When the child required emergency treatment last year," he said evenly, "a blood donor match was flagged through a private registry connected to one of my foundations." The room went still. "I did not act on it," he continued, "until today." Elena's chest tightened painfully. He had known. For how long? The judge leaned back slightly. "So, to summarize," she said slowly, We have a child whose birth record was amended without paternal acknowledgement, a hospital report that was suppressed following outside pressure, a blood type discrepancy left unresolved, and a man now voluntarily requesting DNA confirmation. Her eyes moved between them. This is no longer a routine custody adjustment. Mark's composure fractured. Your Honor, this is manipulation. He's using his influence to insert himself. Sit down, Mr. Reynolds, the judge snapped. He did. Slowly, the judge's gaze returned to Elena. Why? She asked quietly. Did you work so hard to erase a father from the record? The question landed with surgical precision. Because he wasn't safe. Because loving him meant being hunted. Because I chose silence over war. She lifted her chin. I wasn't erasing anyone, she said softly. I was protecting my son. From whom? The judge didn't ask it aloud. She didn't need to. The sealed file sat open on the bench like an accusation, like proof. And for the first time since stepping into that courtroom, Elena understood something terrifying. The secret hadn't been exposed by anger. It had been exposed by paperwork, by records that didn't align, by a system designed to question inconsistencies. And once the court began connecting dots, it wouldn't stop. The judge closed the folder carefully. I am ordering an expedited DNA test, she said firmly. Results will be sealed pending further hearing. Her gaze moved to Allesio Moretti one last time. And if paternity is confirmed, she added, voice steady and deliberate, this court will reassess custody, guardianship, and protection orders accordingly. Protection, the word echoed. Because the file that shouldn't have existed had done more than expose bloodlines. It had forced the court to ask a more dangerous question. Who exactly needed protection from whom? The courtroom had gone too quiet. Not the ordinary quiet of procedure and paperwork, but the kind that pressed against the ribs and made breathing feel like a decision instead of instinct. The judge adjusted the stack of documents in front of her again, slower this time. Deliberate. The DNA order had been issued. The tension had already shifted. But something else in the file held her attention. Elena could see it in the way the judge's eyes moved, backward instead of forward. She wasn't done. Before we adjourn, the judge said calmly, there is one more item I'd like clarified. Mark's attorney stiffened. Kaplan straightened beside Elena. Even the court reporter paused mid-keystroke. The judge slid a thin medical summary from the file and lifted it slightly. This was attached to the child's pediatric record during last year's emergency admission. Elena's heart lurched. Emergency admission. She remembered the night too clearly. A fever that wouldn't break. A panicked drive to the hospital. Forms shoved across counters while her son clung to her neck. She had signed everything herself. Alone. The hospital listed an emergency secondary contact, the judge continued, added electronically after intake. Elena's stomach dropped. No, that couldn't be right. I did not authorize, she started, but her voice faded under the judge's raised hand. The surname listed here, the judge said, reading carefully, is not Reynolds. The room stilled. Mark leaned forward, hungry. Kaplan's pen stopped moving. Elena felt her pulse in her throat. The judge's eyes moved across the page again, confirming. Then she spoke it. Moretti. The name didn't echo. It detonated. It hung in the air like something heavy and undeniable, like a piece of truth too solid to ignore once spoken aloud. The judge looked up sharply. Not at Elena, at the back of the courtroom. At him. Allesio Moretti didn't flinch. He didn't shift. But something in the room recalibrated around him instantly. The glance lasted only a second. That was all it needed. Mark shot to his feet. Your Honor! Sit down, the judge snapped without looking away from Allesio. Elena's breath came shallow and sharp. She hadn't put his name on that form. She would never have done that. Unless, Her memory scrambled backward, frantic. The hospital. The nurse. The blood registry alert. Someone must have cross-referenced the donor database. Someone must have flagged the match. The judge lowered her gaze to the file again. The child required a transfusion, she said evenly. An emergency donor was located through a private philanthropic registry. Her eyes lifted once more. The registry is owned by the Moretti Foundation. The silence deepened. This wasn't speculation anymore. This wasn't resemblance. This was paperwork. Data. Recorded fact. Kaplan leaned toward Elena, whispering urgently, "Did you authorize that foundation?" "No," she breathed. Across the aisle, Mark's expression shifted from confidence to calculation. "So, he's been involved this whole time?" Mark demanded, voice cracking slightly. "Without disclosure?" Allesio stepped forward before the judge could respond. "May I clarify, Your Honor?" The judge held his gaze for a long beat. "Briefly." His voice was calm, steady, measured to avoid the slightest hint of aggression. "The Foundation operates an automated blood match registry," he said. "Hospitals submit data. Matches are returned without names attached." He paused. "The notification came to my office. I did not act on it." A muscle flickered in his jaw. "Until today." Elena's chest tightened painfully. He had known. He had known the moment the registry flagged the blood type. A B negative. Rare, connected. The judge studied him carefully. "You're stating," she said, "that you became aware of the child's medical profile through a donor alert tied to your foundation?" "Yes." "And you did not intervene?" "No." The word carried weight. Restraint. Mark scoffed loudly. "Convenient." The judge silenced him with a look. Elena's mind raced. She remembered the nurse mentioning a donor had been found remarkably fast. She remembered thinking it was a miracle. It hadn't been a miracle. It had been him. The judge tapped the file lightly with one finger. "Mr. Moretti," she said slowly, "this surname appearing in the child's emergency file, was that entered by you or your representatives?" "No, Your Honor." "Then how did it appear?" A pause, not hesitation, consideration. "I can only assume," Allesio said evenly, "that the hospital system auto-linked the donor registry to the child's profile after the transfusion." Elena felt her hands begin to shake. That single surname. One digital connection. One database. One piece of information that slipped past her careful erasure. The judge leaned back in her chair. "So the hospital flagged a blood match through your foundation," she summarized, "and that registry auto-associated the child's profile with your surname." "Yes." "And you're telling this court you did nothing with that information?" "I waited." "For what?" "For confirmation." The word landed heavily. Elena finally looked back at him. His eyes found hers immediately. There was no accusation there. No triumph. Only something steady and unmovable. "I needed to see him." The judge cleared her throat. "This court cannot ignore the coincidence of a rare blood type, a donor registry owned by you, and your sudden appearance in a custody hearing." Allesio inclined his head slightly. "I understand." Mark stood again despite himself. "Your Honor, this is exactly the kind of influence I was referring to. My son is being entangled in something bigger than this courtroom." The judge's gaze snapped toward him. "Your son," she said sharply, "may have a biological father whose identity was never disclosed." The word father hit like a gavel. No one spoke. The courtroom felt smaller, closer. A single surname, one glance. And now? The entire room knew what had once lived only in Elena's silence. The judge closed the medical file slowly. "I will not speculate further until DNA results are returned," she said. "But let me be clear. This court prioritizes the child's safety above pride, secrecy, or power." Her eyes moved between them. "Mr. Moretti," she added, If paternity is confirmed, your involvement will not be optional. It will be regulated. I would expect nothing less, he replied. Elena's heart ached, because that was the truth she had feared. Not that he would deny it, not that he would disappear, but that he would stand, publicly. Unflinching, the judge looked down at the file one last time. One name, she murmured quietly, almost to herself. Then she looked up, and in that look, the entire courtroom felt it. This case was no longer about visitation schedules. It was about blood. And blood, once named, demanded reckoning. The silence after the surname felt fragile, like glass. The judge's words still hovered in the air, regulated paternity, safety, when Mark stood again. This time, he didn't wait to be invited. Your Honor, he said, voice tight but controlled. This is exactly why I filed the emergency motion. Elena's stomach dropped. Emergency. She turned sharply toward Kaplan. What emergency motion? His expression shifted, confusion bleeding into alarm. We responded to a modification request. There was no. There was, Mark cut in smoothly. Filed 3 days ago, under seal. The judge glanced down at her monitor, fingers moving across the keyboard. The faint tapping echoed in the still room. I see it, she said. Emergency petition for temporary sole custody pending investigation. Elena felt the floor tilt beneath her. You what? She whispered. Mark didn't look at her. He addressed the bench instead. Your Honor, I have reason to believe my son is being exposed to individuals with violent histories. Powerful individuals. Men who operate outside the law. His eyes flicked deliberately toward the back of the courtroom, toward Allesio. The implication was surgical. Kaplan stood abruptly. Objection. This is inflammatory and unsupported. Mark's attorney rose as well, calm and practiced. We are not making criminal accusations. We are raising concerns regarding association and environmental stability. Environmental stability. Elena's hands curled into fists beneath the table. I have documentation, Mark continued, voice steady. Security vehicles outside the school. A sudden financial foundation attached to my son's name. My ex-wife refusing to answer direct questions about her relationship to Mr. Moretti. He paused. She is hiding something, and I believe that something places our child at risk. The courtroom shifted again, not explosive this time, but uncomfortable. Curious. The judge leaned forward slightly. Mr. Reynolds, she said evenly, you are aware that allegations require proof. Yes, Your Honor, and that's precisely why I'm asking for temporary sole custody until the DNA results clarify the situation. Elena felt her pulse slam into her throat. Sole custody. He wasn't afraid. He was seizing opportunity. Kaplan leaned close. Stay calm. But her calm had cracks now. Mark finally looked at her. There was no rage in his expression, just calculation. You've been distant, he said softly, as if concerned. Secretive. You won't tell me who's been around our son. He hasn't been around him, she snapped before she could stop herself. The room stilled. Mark's eyebrow lifted slightly. Interesting. The judge's gaze sharpened. Elena Reynolds, she said carefully. Are you denying that Mr. Moretti has had contact with the child? Elena swallowed. The image flashed in her mind. The school hallway, the playground, the small hand brushing against a larger one. I am denying, she said tightly, that my son is in danger. That wasn't the question, the judge replied. Kaplan stepped in quickly. Your Honor, any contact was incidental and public. There has been no private involvement. Mark exhaled sharply. Public. There were black SUVs at the school. They were parked legally, Kaplan countered. They were intimidating. They were visible. Exactly, Mark snapped. Elena realized then what he was doing. Visibility. He was twisting it, making protection look like threat. You're unstable, Mark said suddenly, turning to her with practiced sorrow. You've been jumpy for months, checking over your shoulder. changing routes home. You think I haven't noticed?" The words hit harder than she expected, because they weren't entirely false. Fear had shaped her habits. "You've always been anxious," he continued softly. "Even when we were married. You isolate. You withdraw. You make decisions without consulting anyone." "That is not instability," Kaplan shot back. "It is when a child is involved," Mark replied smoothly. He turned back to the judge. "I'm not accusing her of wrongdoing. I'm accusing her of poor judgment. If Mr. Moretti is indeed the biological father, then that means she concealed critical information for years." Elena's vision blurred. "She denied my son access to his father," Mark continued, voice tightening at the edges. "And now that father happens to be one of the most powerful and controversial men in the city." The word controversial lingered deliberately. "Your Honor," Mark said, pressing forward, "how can this court trust her decision-making when she hid something this significant?" The question landed like a strike. Allesio didn't move, didn't speak. But Elena felt the shift behind her, contained tension coiling tighter. The judge's expression remained unreadable. "Mr. Reynolds," she said slowly, "your emergency motion claims imminent risk." "Yes. Where is the imminent risk?" Mark hesitated for half a second. Then he delivered it. "If Mr. Moretti has enemies, and I believe he does, then my son becomes leverage." The word hung heavy. Leverage. Elena felt something cold settle in her chest. There it was. Not concern. Not fatherly protection. Strategy. Mark wasn't afraid of danger. He was afraid of losing control. "Temporary sole custody," he repeated calmly, "until the court determines whether this environment is appropriate. Environment. Like her life was a contaminated zone." Kaplan rose again. "Your Honor, this is opportunistic. My client has provided stable housing, consistent schooling, and no evidence of neglect." "She has provided secrecy," Mark cut in. "And you," Kaplan replied sharply, "have provided no proof of harm." The judge raised her hand, silencing them both. The courtroom held its breath. "Elena Reynolds," she said carefully, "have you ever felt threatened by Mr. Moretti?" The question sliced cleanly. Elena's mind flashed backward, to the storm, the hospital, the years of silence. Threatened by him? No. Threatened by the world around him. Always. "No," she said quietly. Mark scoffed under his breath. The judge's eyes moved to Allesio. "Have you ever threatened this child's safety?" she asked. His voice was calm, controlled. "Never." The truth of it vibrated through the room. Mark's composure cracked for the first time. "He's manipulating the optics," Mark snapped. "He's playing benevolent benefactor while inserting himself into my son's life." "Your son?" Allesio repeated softly. The room went still again. It wasn't shouted, it wasn't aggressive, but it carried weight. Mark faltered. Because the courtroom no longer belonged to him. The emergency motion wasn't about safety, it was about territory. And territory had just been publicly challenged. The judge closed the file slowly. "I am not granting emergency sole custody at this time," she said firmly. Mark stiffened. "However," she added, "until paternity is confirmed, no new contact shall occur without court approval." Elena exhaled shakily. Not victory, but not loss. Mark's eyes burned with something darker now. This wasn't over. It was escalation. And as the judge scheduled the next hearing date, Elena understood with chilling clarity. Her ex had made his move. Not out of fear, but out of control. And men who lost control didn't retreat quietly. They recalculated. The judge did not adjourn. That was the first sign this wasn't going to settle quietly. "Before we proceed any further," she said, removing her glasses and folding them carefully on the bench, "I am appointing and calling the child's guardian ad litem to testify." Mark's attorney stiffened. "Your Honor, we weren't informed." "You were notified when the emergency motion was filed," the judge replied coolly. If you are requesting sole custody, the court will hear directly from the child's advocate. Elena's pulse skipped. She hadn't expected that. A side door opened, and a woman stepped inside carrying a slim binder. Mid-40s, no-nonsense suit. Calm expression that suggested she had heard every version of parental warfare and was unimpressed by most of it. "Ms. Hartley," the judge greeted, "please take the stand." The woman nodded, was sworn in, and seated herself with quiet efficiency. Elena forced herself to breathe. This wasn't about strategy now. It was about her son. Ms. Hartley opened her binder. "I've met with the child 3 times over the past month," she began. "Twice at school, once in the mother's home." Mark leaned forward immediately. "And?" he pressed. "And," Ms. Hartley continued evenly, "the child presents as stable, articulate, and securely attached to his mother." Relief flooded Elena so sharply it hurt. "He performs above grade level academically," she added. "Teachers describe him as observant, polite, and emotionally regulated." Mark shifted in his seat. "And his home environment?" the judge asked. "Orderly," Ms. Hartley replied. "Clean, structured, no signs of neglect, no signs of chaos." The word chaos seemed deliberate. Kaplan allowed himself a subtle nod. Ms. Hartley continued, turning a page. "However," she said, "the child exhibits noticeable tension when discussing transitions to his father's residence." The room shifted. Mark stiffened. "In what way?" his attorney asked quickly. Ms. Hartley didn't look at him. "He becomes quieter," she said, "more guarded. He asked, unprompted, whether he would get in trouble for saying certain things." Elena felt something twist painfully in her chest. "Did he specify what kind of trouble?" the judge asked. "He referenced being told that family matters stay inside the house," Ms. Hartley said calmly, "and he demonstrated physical tension when describing discipline." Mark's face flushed. "That's absurd. I enforce rules." "No one is disputing your right to enforce rules," Ms. Hartley replied evenly. "I am reporting observable behavioral changes." The judge's pen moved across her notepad. "Did the child describe feeling unsafe?" she asked. "No," Ms. Hartley said carefully. "He did not use that word, but he did describe feeling smaller at his father's house." The phrase lingered. Smaller. Elena closed her eyes briefly. Mark's jaw tightened. "Children exaggerate. Children internalize," Ms. Hartley corrected calmly. The silence that followed felt heavier than any accusation. The judge looked toward Elena. "Has the mother demonstrated instability?" she asked directly. "No," Ms. Hartley replied without hesitation. "In fact, the mother displays heightened vigilance." Mark scoffed. "Heightened vigilance," Ms. Hartley clarified, "is not synonymous with instability. It can indicate protective instinct." The judge's gaze sharpened. "Protective from what?" she asked. Ms. Hartley paused just long enough to acknowledge the weight of the question. "The child is unusually aware of his surroundings," she said carefully. "He scans rooms. He notices vehicles parked repeatedly near his school. He identifies adults who watch too long." A ripple moved through the courtroom. Elena's pulse thudded in her ears. "He does not appear frightened," Ms. Hartley continued, "but he is accustomed." "Accustomed to what?" Mark demanded. "To protection," she replied. The word hung there. Protection. Ms. Hartley turned another page. "There have been visible security presences near the child's school. While not intrusive, they are observable." Mark pointed immediately toward Allesio. "Exactly." Miss Hartley lifted her eyes calmly. "I did not state that this protection was harmful." The judge leaned forward slightly. "Is the child distressed by this security presence?" she asked. "No," Ms. Hartley replied. "He described it as normal." Elena felt her throat tighten. Normal. That was what frightened her most. Ms. Hartley continued. "Children who are frightened exhibit withdrawal, regression, aggression. This child does not. He exhibits alertness and resilience. She closed the binder. In my professional opinion, the child is emotionally secure with his mother. He does not present signs of neglect or psychological harm. Mark's composure cracked slightly. And the father? Miss Hartley met his gaze evenly. I recommend structured visitation with oversight. I do not recommend sole custody at this time. The words landed with finality. The judge exhaled slowly. And what of the alleged dangerous associations? She asked. Ms. Hartley's eyes flicked, just briefly, toward the back of the courtroom. The child does not describe the individual in question as threatening, she said carefully. In fact, he described him as someone who listens. The silence was electric. Elena didn't dare turn around. The judge tapped her pen lightly against the desk. So we have a child who feels secure with his mother, cautious with his father, and unafraid of the alleged outside influence. Yes, Ms. Hartley confirmed. Mark shook his head. This is manipulation. Children don't understand the danger. Children understand how adults make them feel, Ms. Hartley replied evenly. The room held its breath again. The judge leaned back, considering. Ms. Hartley, she said finally, do you believe the mother is hiding information that places the child at immediate risk? Ms. Hartley paused. I believe, she said carefully, that the mother has made decisions rooted in fear. But fear does not equal harm. The words cut clean. Fear did not equal harm. The judge nodded slowly. Thank you, she said. You may step down. As Mrs. Hartley left the stand, the atmosphere in the courtroom felt altered. Not calmer, sharper. Because now the narrative had shifted. This wasn't a reckless mother entangling her child in danger. It was a vigilant mother navigating a world that required vigilance. And beneath it all, one truth had quietly solidified. The child was not afraid of the man in the back row. He was accustomed to him. And that meant this story had been unfolding far longer than anyone in that courtroom had realized. The judge didn't hesitate. Mr. Moretti, she said evenly, since your name is now embedded in both the medical record and this proceeding, I am calling you to the stand. The room shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but noticeably. Allesio didn't look surprised. He rose from the back row with the same unhurried control he had carried since entering the courtroom. No glances toward the door. No visible security stepping forward. Just him. He walked to the stand as if it were any other room he'd ever entered, aware of every eye, but untouched by it. Elena's chest tightened. This was the moment she had feared. Not the exposure, the restraint. He was sworn in. He placed his hand on the Bible without hesitation, his voice steady as he affirmed the oath. Then he sat. The judge folded her hands. State your full name for the record. Allesio Moretti. His voice carried without effort. You are the founder of the Moretti Foundation? Yes. You oversee the donor registry associated with the hospital transfusion in question? Yes. And you are aware that your surname appears in the child's emergency medical file? Yes. No elaboration, no defensive tone, just fact. Mark's attorney stood quickly. Mr. Moretti, when did you first become aware of this child? Allesio didn't look at Mark. He looked at the judge. I became aware of a potential connection last year, he said calmly, when a transfusion alert flagged through the Foundation's system. And you did nothing? I verified internally, he replied. Privately. Mark's attorney stepped closer. Privately, how? I requested confirmation of blood type match probability, he said, without names attached. And when you realized it was likely your biological child? A beat. He didn't flinch. I did not realize, he said carefully. I suspected. The difference mattered. You did not approach the mother? No. Why not? His gaze flicked, just once, toward Elena. Because she left, he said evenly. A ripple moved through the room. Left. The judge leaned forward slightly. Left what? She asked. He didn't rush the answer. Left me, he said. The simplicity of it landed harder than accusation would have. Mark scoffed quietly. So you admit you had a relationship with my ex-wife? Yes. The word dropped clean. Elena felt her pulse spike. How long? The judge asked. Years ago, he replied, before the child was born. And you were unaware of the pregnancy? Yes. No bitterness, no blame, just truth. Mark's attorney circled carefully. Mr. Moretti, are you involved in any criminal enterprises? Kaplan shot up immediately. Objection. Sustained, the judge replied. Rephrase. Mark's attorney adjusted. Are you aware that your public reputation includes allegations of organized activity? Alessio's expression didn't change. I am aware of rumors, he said calmly. I am also aware that none have resulted in convictions. And you expect this court to entrust a child to your environment? I expect this court, he replied evenly, to consider evidence. The room stilled again. No raised voice, no defensive edge, just control. The judge interjected. Mr. Moretti, have you had contact with the child? Yes, Elena's breath caught. Describe the nature of that contact. Public, he said. Incidental. Did you initiate it? No. Did you encourage further interaction? No. The answers were precise, minimal. He was protecting her. Elena realized that with painful clarity. He could have described the school hallway, the playground, the moment their son had reached for his hand. He didn't. He was not here to claim. He was here to stand. The judge's gaze sharpened. Mr. Moretti, she said slowly, did you ever threaten the mother? The question sliced cleanly. Elena's stomach twisted. He didn't hesitate. No. Did you ever attempt to control her movements or associations? No. Mark laughed under his breath. Convenient memory. The judge silenced him with a look. Then why, she asked, eyes locked on Allesio, did she feel the need to amend a birth certificate and erase your name? There it was, the direct question, the one Elena had prayed would never be asked aloud. The room felt smaller, hotter. He could end it now. He could expose everything. The storm, the pressure, the world he had tried to shield her from. Instead, he held the silence, long enough that everyone felt it. She made her decision, he said quietly, and I respected it. That does not answer the question, the judge replied evenly. Another beat. His jaw tightened slightly. He looked at Elena then, really looked at her, not asking permission, not demanding it, just acknowledging the weight of what he could say. Because, he said finally, voice steady, my life is not simple. The understatement hovered. Your Honor, he continued, the mother believed that association with me would place the child at risk. Mark's expression flickered. So she ran from you, the judge said. Yes, and you allowed it. Yes. Why? The room held its breath again. Alessio's voice dropped slightly. Because loving someone, he said quietly, does not mean forcing them to stay. Silence settled like dust. The judge studied him carefully. And now? Now. The word felt heavier than all the others. I am here, he said, because I will not run from my child. Not aggressive, not possessive, just present. Mark shifted in his seat, visibly unsettled. The judge leaned back slowly. You are asking this court to recognize you as a potential biological father, she said. Yes. And if confirmed? I will comply with every regulation, he replied. Every evaluation, every restriction. His gaze didn't waver. I am not here to destabilize the child's life, he added. I am here to be accountable. Accountable. The word hung in the air. Elena felt something inside her fracture. Not fear. Recognition. He wasn't exposing her past. He wasn't justifying it. He wasn't defending himself beyond what was necessary. He was refusing to let the court turn her survival into a spectacle. The judge closed the file slowly. "I will reserve further comment until DNA confirmation," she said. But the tone had changed. The room felt different, less suspicious, more measured. As Allesio stepped down from the stand, he didn't look triumphant. He didn't look defeated. He looked steady. And as he passed Elena's table on his way back to the rear of the courtroom, he didn't speak. He didn't need to.
Nah.
Because the message had already been delivered under oath. He would not expose her, but he would not disappear again. No one left the courtroom. Not even the spectators who had wandered in expecting a routine custody dispute and found themselves sitting inside something far heavier. The judge didn't call for recess. She didn't shuffle the case aside. Instead, she reopened the medical file. "I want the lab results from last year displayed," she said to the clerk. A screen flickered on beside the bench. Elena's stomach dropped. She remembered those results. The fever. The transfusion. The way the doctor had frowned slightly before saying everything would be fine. It had been fine. She had believed that was the end of it. The judge leaned forward, scanning the data. "Rare antigen marker," she murmured. "Factor H deficiency pattern." Kaplan shifted beside Elena. "Your Honor?" The judge didn't look up. "This specific genetic marker," she said slowly, "appears again here." She tapped another document, a charitable foundation's public medical initiative report. Allesio's foundation. A published awareness campaign about hereditary clotting disorders. Elena's heart began to pound. "That report," the judge continued, eyes narrowing slightly, "references a family history of Factor H mutation in the Moretti line." The room stilled. Mark's attorney froze. Kaplan went very quiet. The judge finally looked up. "Mr. Moretti," she said carefully, "is it true that your family has documented cases of hereditary Factor H deficiency?" "Yes." He didn't hesitate. It wasn't a secret. It had never been a crime. Just biology. "And is it also true," the judge continued, glancing back at the screen, "that this mutation is rare?" "Yes." "How rare?" "Approximately 1 in several 100,000. A ripple moved through the room. Elena felt cold. The judge shifted to another page. The child's lab results indicate the same mutation. No one spoke. Not Mark. Not Kaplan. Not even the court reporter. The judge leaned back slowly. "Combined with the AB negative blood type," she said quietly, "and the donor registry match through the Moretti Foundation." She let the sentence trail off. It didn't need finishing. Mark stood abruptly. "This is circumstantial," he snapped. "Genetic coincidences happen." "Yes," the judge agreed calmly. "They do." She closed the folder with deliberate precision. "But courts do not ignore patterns when they converge." Elena felt her hands tremble. This wasn't about rumor anymore. This wasn't about resemblance. This was science. Data that didn't care about secrets. The judge folded her hands. "I am ordering expedited DNA testing effective immediately," she said. "Results within 72 hours. The words felt final, irreversible. "Both parties will submit samples under court supervision," she added. Mark looked stunned. "I am not required to—" "You are," the judge said sharply, "if you intend to challenge paternity or assert sole custody." Silence fell again. Allesio nodded once. "I will comply." His voice was steady, prepared. Elena's throat tightened painfully. She had known this was coming. The moment the surname was spoken. The moment the lab results appeared on that screen. Still, hearing it said aloud felt like a door slamming shut behind her. The judge's gaze moved to her. "Elena Reynolds," she said, voice measured but not unkind. "You have the right to object." Object, to proof, to truth. She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. What would she say? No, Your Honor, I prefer the lie. No, please don't confirm what everyone already feels. Her silence answered for her. The judge nodded slowly. Testing will occur at a neutral facility. Chain of custody will be documented. No external interference. Her eyes flicked toward Allesio briefly on that last line. He didn't react. Furthermore, the judge continued, pending results, no changes to custody shall occur. The child's routine remains intact. Routine! The word steadied Elena slightly. School, bedtime, morning cereal, 72 hours. That was how long she had left before the secret became ink on official letterhead. Mark's composure fractured completely. This is insane, he muttered. You're legitimizing him. I am legitimizing evidence, the judge corrected. Allesio remained still, controlled, but Elena saw it in his eyes now. Not triumph, not satisfaction. Resolve. He wasn't fighting for custody. He wasn't posturing. He was waiting for confirmation. The judge gathered the documents together. One more thing, she added quietly. The room held its breath again. Should paternity be confirmed, this court will revisit not only custody, but protection parameters. Protection. The word landed differently this time. Not as accusation, as inevitability. If the child carries a rare genetic condition tied to a known family line, the judge said, then both parents have a legal obligation to disclose medical history moving forward. Elena's chest tightened. Both parents. She hadn't heard that phrasing in 8 years. The gavel struck lightly. Court adjourned until results are received. Chairs scraped softly against the floor. People began to move. But the air remained heavy. 72 hours. Elena stood slowly, legs unsteady. Kaplan leaned close. We can prepare for all outcomes. All outcomes. Allesio didn't approach her. Didn't touch her. He waited until the room thinned. Then, quietly as he passed behind her on his way out, he spoke without stopping. I won't let this hurt him. Her breath caught. It wasn't a promise of power. It wasn't a threat. It was a father speaking before proof. And as the courtroom doors closed behind them, Elena understood the most terrifying part of all. The DNA test wasn't going to create a father. It was going to confirm one, and once confirmed, there would be no going back to silence. The courthouse hallway smelled like old paper and floor polish. It should have felt neutral. Government buildings were designed that way, bland, controlled, stripped of personality. But as Elena stepped out of the courtroom, the air felt charged. 72 hours. That was what the judge had given them. 72 hours for blood to become legal truth. Kaplan was speaking beside her, something about logistics and chain of custody, but she barely heard him. Her senses were stretched thin, alert in a way that had nothing to do with legal strategy. The hallway was busier than before. Too busy. A few reporters had appeared near the elevators, local legal correspondents who must have caught wind of the name attached to the case. Not shouting, not yet, but watching. Visibility cuts both ways. The words echoed in her head. Elena, Kaplan said quietly, stay close. She nodded, adjusting her bag on her shoulder. Across the corridor, Mark stood with his attorney, voice low and tight. He looked furious, not defeated, not shaken. Furious. This wasn't the outcome he'd expected. He caught her eye, held it. And for a moment she saw something that chilled her far more than courtroom arguments ever could. Resentment. Not toward Allesio. Toward her. She turned away. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. A crowd shifted forward. Security presence was subtle. 2 courthouse officers positioned near the exit. It should have felt controlled. Instead, it felt like the seconds before something tipped. She stepped into the elevator with Kaplan. The doors slid shut. Only then did she exhale. You did fine, he said quietly. It's not about fine, she replied. The elevator descended slowly. When the doors opened into the main lobby, the noise level rose. Low murmurs, footsteps, the echo of voices bouncing off marble walls. And then she saw them. 2 men she didn't recognize. Not reporters, not courthouse staff. They weren't holding cameras. They weren't pretending to check phones. They were watching her. Not Allesio. Her. Her pulse quickened. "Keep walking," Kaplan murmured. They moved toward the exit. The men moved too, not rushing, matching pace. The courthouse doors opened to the parking lot, bright afternoon sunlight flooding the entrance. Cars lined the curb. A small cluster of journalists lingered near the steps now, clearly aware that something larger than a custody hearing had unfolded upstairs. "Elena Reynolds!" someone called. She didn't respond. She stepped down the courthouse stairs carefully, and that was when one of the men closed the distance. "Mrs. Reynolds," he said smoothly, too close. "Do you feel safe bringing a child into that kind of world?" She froze. Kaplan stepped between them immediately. "Step back!" The man didn't touch her, didn't raise his voice. He just smiled slightly. "Just asking a question," he said. "Public concern." The second man moved closer to her other side. "You think he can protect you from everything?" he added quietly. "Men like him have enemies." Her chest tightened. This wasn't journalism. It wasn't random. It was precise. A message delivered softly enough to avoid arrest. "You're done!" Kaplan snapped. "Security!" One of the courthouse officers began moving down the steps. But the men didn't retreat. Not immediately. The first one leaned closer, just enough that she could smell cologne layered over something colder. "DNA doesn't just confirm fathers," he murmured. "It paints targets." Her stomach dropped, and then everything shifted. The low hum of engines, the synchronized opening of car doors. Black SUVs pulled sharply to the curb, not blocking traffic, not breaking laws. Just arriving. Visible. Deliberate. The courthouse officers stiffened instinctively. The 2 men stepped back half a pace. Not out of fear. Out of recalculation. Allesio emerged from the rear vehicle, not hurried, not shouting, but present in a way that bent attention toward him. The reporters' murmurs grew louder. Cameras lifted. This was no longer a quiet family dispute. It was a spectacle. Allesio's gaze found her instantly, then shifted to the men. No raised voice, no theatrical threat. He didn't need one. "Is there a problem?" he asked calmly. The man who had leaned toward her earlier smiled thinly. "No problem," he said. "Just civic curiosity." Allesio took 1 step forward, measured, controlled. "Curiosity," he said evenly, "is safest when it remains at a distance." The air between them felt charged. Courthouse security reached the group at last. "You two," the officer barked. "Move along." The men held Allesio's gaze a second longer. Then they stepped back. Slowly, retreating toward the sidewalk. Not defeated, not threatened, just satisfied. They had delivered what they came to deliver. A warning. Elena realized her hands were shaking. Allesio didn't look at her immediately. He watched until the men disappeared into the crowd. Only then did he turn. "Are you hurt?" he asked quietly. She shook her head. The reporters were closer now, sensing blood in the water. "Mr. Moretti, is this related to the custody case? Are there threats involved? Is the child in danger?" The questions overlapped. The quiet case had exploded. Allesio stepped slightly to her side, not in front of her, not claiming space. With her. "Get her to the car," he said calmly to one of his security men. She stiffened. "I can walk." "I know," he replied, but his hand hovered near her elbow, not touching, just ready. Visible, accountable. The courthouse steps had become a stage. Cameras flashed. Mark stood at the top of the stairs, watching. Not intervening. Not defending. Just observing the chaos as it unfolded. And Elena understood something with sudden clarity. This wasn't random intimidation. This was escalation. Someone had seen the hearing as opportunity. Someone had decided that if the DNA confirmed blood, they would apply pressure before the ink dried. She allowed herself to be guided toward the vehicle, not dragged, not hidden. Visible. As the door opened and she stepped inside, the last thing she saw before it closed was Allesio turning toward the cameras. Not denying, not hiding, present. The quiet custody case was gone. In its place stood something larger, something public, something that could no longer be handled in whispers and sealed envelopes. And as the SUV door shut, sealing her inside a world she had once run from, she realized the threat outside the courthouse hadn't just been about fear. It had been about timing. Because now everyone knew, and when everyone knew, enemies moved faster. The car door closed with a muted, insulated thud. For a moment, the outside world disappeared. No cameras, no courthouse steps, no murmuring crowd replaying the scene in real time across social media. Just quiet. Elena stared at her reflection in the darkened window. She looked pale, not fragile, but finished with pretending. Allesio slid into the seat across from her. The partition remained lowered. His driver's eyes stayed forward, professional, deaf to what didn't concern him. No one spoke immediately. The engine started smoothly. They pulled away from the courthouse without urgency. That was his way. Never rush. Never react faster than necessary. But she could feel the coiled tension in him. The men outside hadn't surprised him. They had confirmed something. "Who were they?" she asked finally. "Freelancers," he said calmly. "Testing distance." "Testing mine," she replied. "Yes." Silence settled again. Her pulse had slowed, but not enough. "They said DNA paints targets." "It can," he said. There was no comfort in his tone. Just truth. She turned to face him fully. "This is why I left." The words hung between them, years late and still sharp. He didn't interrupt, didn't defend. "You think I ran because I was scared of you," she continued, voice steady despite the tremor beneath it. "I wasn't." He held her gaze. "I was scared of what loving you meant," she said. Outside the tinted glass, the city moved in ordinary rhythms, traffic lights changing, pedestrians crossing streets, people living unaware that inside this car, history was being dragged into daylight. "The night I went into labor," she said quietly. "There were 2 cars outside my apartment I didn't recognize." His jaw tightened. "I didn't tell you," she continued, "because I didn't want you coming there. I didn't want you escalating anything." "I would have protected you," he said. "I know," she replied immediately. "That's what I was afraid of." He went still. She swallowed. "When the power went out at the hospital," she said, voice lowering. "One of the nurses whispered that someone had been asking for you in the lobby. Not by name, by description." His eyes darkened. "I realized then that this wasn't just about us," she continued. "It was about leverage, about enemies who couldn't reach you directly." She leaned back against the seat. "And I was about to give birth to the most obvious leverage imaginable." He didn't look away. "After he was born," she said softly, "I held him and understood something I hadn't understood before." "What?" he asked. "That love isn't brave," she said. "It's selfish." His expression shifted, barely. "You would have fought for us," she continued. "You would have tightened security. You would have made the world smaller and more guarded." "Yes. And that would have confirmed everything," she whispered, "that he was valuable." The word tasted bitter. "Children in your world don't get anonymity," she said. "They get shadows." The car slowed at a red light. For a moment they sat suspended between movement and stillness. "I amended the birth certificate because I didn't want his name searchable," she said. "I didn't want anyone connecting dots." "You erased me," he said quietly. "I erased a target," she corrected. Silence again. He looked down at his hands. Not offended. Not angry. Just absorbing. "There were threats," she said finally. His eyes snapped back to hers. "Not direct," she clarified quickly. "Subtle. A note in my mailbox. A car idling too long. A florist delivering flowers I didn't order." His jaw tightened harder this time. "After that," she continued, "I didn't need proof. I needed distance." "You should have told me," he said. "And you would have done what?" she challenged gently. "Eliminated anyone who looked at us too long?" The corner of his mouth tightened. "That's what I mean," she said softly. "Your solutions are final. Mine had to be quiet." The car turned onto a quieter street. The city noise softened. "I didn't leave because I stopped loving you," she said. The confession sat between them like something fragile. "I left because I loved him more than I loved the idea of us." He closed his eyes briefly. "Just once." "And you thought I would choose war over him," he said. "I thought you wouldn't hesitate," she replied. A long breath left him. "You weren't wrong," he admitted. The honesty hurt more than denial would have. She looked down at her hands. "I have spent 8 years building a life where he can walk into school without being watched," she said, "where his name doesn't echo in rooms he's too young to understand." "And now it does," he said quietly. "Yes." The word cracked slightly. He leaned forward, forearms resting on his knees. "I did not come back to take control," he said. "I came because the truth surfaced." "And now?" she asked. "Now I adjust," he replied. She studied him carefully. "Those men outside," she said, "they weren't there because of custody." "No. They were there because your enemies think blood is leverage." "Yes." The word wasn't defensive. It was factual. She nodded slowly. "That's why I ran," she said. "Not because I doubted you, because I understood the cost." The car pulled to a stop in front of her building. The engine idled. He didn't open the door. "Why are you telling me this now?" he asked quietly. "Because the court will ask again," she replied, "and I won't let them paint me as unstable." She met his gaze steadily. "I hid him because I wanted him to grow up boring," she said. "Safe. Anonymous." "And if that anonymity is gone?" he asked. She swallowed. "Then we don't escalate," she said. "We don't posture. We don't make it dramatic." He listened. "We make it structured," she continued. "Visible enough that harm is harder. Quiet enough that he still gets to be a child." He held her eyes. "You don't get to tear the world apart for him," she said softly. "You have to learn how to build within it." A long pause. Then finally, "I can do that," he said. It wasn't a promise shouted. It wasn't a vow carved in steel. It was quieter than that, but heavier. She reached for the door handle, then hesitated. "One more thing," she said without turning back. "I didn't hide him from you to punish you." He nodded once. "I know." She stepped out of the car. The air felt different now. Not lighter, but clearer. Because the truth, once spoken aloud, stopped living in the dark. And survival, she had finally said it, was not betrayal. It was the only way she had known to keep her son alive. The courtroom was fuller this time. Not packed, but aware. Word had spread, quietly, strategically, through legal circles and media threads that knew how to read patterns. A rare genetic marker. A high-profile surname. An expedited DNA order. Elena sat at the same table as before, hands folded too tightly in her lap. She had not slept. Not really. The last 72 hours had stretched and thinned until time itself felt fragile. Across the aisle, Mark looked composed. Too composed. Behind her, Allesio sat where he always had, unmoving, unbothered on the surface. But the air around him felt different today. Not tense. Certain. The bailiff called the room to order. The judge entered without unnecessary ceremony, file already in hand. No preamble. No procedural delay. "I have received the expedited DNA results," she said evenly. The words hit like a dropped glass. Elena's breath caught in her throat. The judge did not open the folder immediately. Instead, she looked at both parties. "I will remind everyone present," she began, voice steady but edged with something firmer than before, "that this courtroom is not a stage for pride or spectacle." Her eyes moved to Mark, then to Allesio. "This is about a child." The silence tightened. Finally, she opened the file. The sound of paper sliding against paper felt too loud. "Elena Reynolds," she said calmly, "the DNA analysis confirms a 99.999% probability that Allesio Moretti is the biological father of the minor child." There it was. No dramatic pause. No flourish. Just fact. The room erupted anyway. Gasps. Whispers. A sharp intake of breath from someone in the back row. Mark shot to his feet. "This is unbelievable." "Sit down," the judge snapped sharply. He did. But his composure had fractured. Elena felt the words settle into her bones. Confirmed. Not suspected. Not implied. Confirmed. She didn't look back at Allesio. She couldn't. The judge continued. "The genetic markers align. The rare factor H mutation aligns. The blood type aligns. There is no reasonable dispute." Silence fell again, this time heavier. The truth had weight now. Legal weight. Mark's attorney stood cautiously. "Your Honor, this does not automatically alter existing custody." "It alters everything," the judge replied coldly. Her gaze shifted to Allesio. "Mr. Moretti, you are now legally recognized as the biological father pending formal documentation." He inclined his head once. No smile. No visible reaction. But the air shifted around him. Present. Accountable. The judge's eyes returned to Elena. "Mrs. Reynolds, the court acknowledges your previous decision to amend the birth record. However, paternity has now been established." Elena forced herself to nod. The judge closed the DNA report carefully. "And now," she said, voice lowering slightly, "we address what matters." She leaned forward. "Mr. Reynolds," she said, turning to Mark, "you filed for emergency sole custody citing instability and dangerous associations." Mark swallowed. "Yes, Your Honor." "You have no evidence that the child has been harmed," she said flatly. "No, but—" "No," she repeated firmly. "You do not." She shifted her attention to Allesio. "And Mr. Moretti, while your biological connection is undeniable, this court will not permit sudden upheaval in the child's life." "I would not request it," he replied calmly. That answer landed differently now. Not defensive. Measured. The judge studied him. "Good," she said. Then her voice hardened. "Because from this moment forward, this is not about parental ego. It is not about power, influence, or reputation." Her eyes swept the room. "It is about safety." The word felt sharper than it had before. "There was an intimidation attempt outside this courthouse," she continued. "I have reviewed security footage." Elena's stomach tightened. The judge's gaze flicked toward Allesio briefly. "Whether related or coincidental, this case now carries elevated risk." Mark shifted uncomfortably. "You will not weaponize that risk," the judge warned him, "and you will not exploit it." He clenched his jaw, but remained silent. The judge's voice softened slightly as she addressed both sides. "This child did not ask for your history," she said. "He did not ask for your enemies. He did not ask for your pride." Her eyes landed squarely on Allesio. "And you," she said evenly. will demonstrate that your presence increases security, not danger. I will, he said without hesitation. Not loudly, but unmistakably. The judge nodded once. Temporary custody remains as is, she ruled. However, Mr. Moretti will be granted supervised integration into the child's life under structured court guidance. Elena exhaled shakily. Not loss, not full surrender. Structure. The court will also implement enhanced confidentiality measures, the judge added. Media presence will be restricted. Security coordination will be reviewed. Her gaze hardened again. If I sense even a hint that this child is being used as leverage, by anyone, I will act decisively. The message was clear. Not a threat, a boundary. The gavel struck. But this time the sound didn't signal chaos. It signaled recognition. Elena finally turned. Allesio met her eyes. No triumph. No I told you so. Just something steadier. Something that said, it's real now. Mark remained seated, pale and furious. The courtroom buzzed again, quieter this time, more careful, because the shock had passed, and what remained was something heavier than speculation. A father confirmed, a mother exposed, a child now legally tied to a name that carried weight far beyond family. As Elena stood, her legs unsteady but unbroken, she understood the true shock of the day wasn't the DNA result. It was what the judge had made clear afterward. Paternity didn't win anything. It didn't grant control. It didn't grant dominance. It granted responsibility. And from this moment forward, the child's safety outweighed every ounce of pride in that room. The courtroom had emptied slowly, not with the frantic rush of scandal, but with the heavy awareness that something irreversible had just been put on record. Confirmed. Father. Responsibility. Elena remained seated long after the benches began to clear. Kaplan was speaking quietly beside her about scheduling and supervised integration plans, but his voice felt distant. Across the room, Mark exited first. No backward glance, no final remark. Just controlled fury wrapped in silence. Allesio did not approach immediately. He waited. Until the room thinned. Until the judge disappeared behind her chamber's door. Until even the reporters lingering outside lost patience and drifted away. Only then did he move. Not toward the center. Toward her. He stopped a respectful distance from the table. Elena. Her name, spoken quietly, felt different now. Not a memory. Not a ghost. Present. You don't get to rewrite everything, she said before he could continue. His expression didn't harden. I'm not here to rewrite, he replied evenly. I'm here to build. She stood slowly, gathering her bag. What does that mean? She asked. It means, he said calmly, I am not petitioning for custody. That stopped her. She had braced for it, for the demand, for the legal maneuver that would turn confirmation into territory. You're not? She asked carefully. No. He didn't hesitate. I will not destabilize his life to satisfy biology. The words landed heavier than she expected. She studied his face, searching for the angle. There wasn't one. Then what do you want? She asked. He held her gaze. Structure. The word echoed slightly in the empty room. I want his schedule protected, he continued. I want professional therapy available, not because he's damaged, but because transitions matter. She blinked. Therapy? She repeated. Yes, he said. A neutral child psychologist, trauma-informed, confidential. He's not traumatized, she said quickly. I know, he replied. I want to keep it that way. Silence lingered between them. He wasn't speaking like a man claiming rights. He was speaking like someone calculating long-term risk. And the threats? She asked. I have a plan, he said. Her stomach tightened. What kind of plan? The kind that ends them, he replied calmly. There it was, the steel beneath the structure. She shook her head immediately. No escalation. He didn't argue. I said I have a plan, he repeated. Not a war. She crossed her arms defensively. Explain! He nodded once. Legal visibility, he said. Public documentation of paternity and protective intent. We already have that. We have confirmation, he corrected. We do not have perimeter. She frowned slightly. Foundation-backed security consultation at the school, he continued. Not guards in hallways. Infrastructure upgrades. Anonymous funding. She hesitated. Digital footprint suppression, he added. Monitoring of known hostile actors through legal channels. Legal, she repeated pointedly. Yes. He held her gaze steadily. No shadows. No retaliation without provocation. She studied him carefully. And if there is provocation? She asked. His jaw tightened slightly. Then I will handle it, he said. That's what I'm afraid of. He stepped closer, but not into her space. I know, he said quietly. That acknowledgement softened something in her chest. And here is my condition, he added. Her spine stiffened. There it is. He didn't flinch. You stop disappearing. The words weren't harsh. They were firm. She blinked. I haven't... You run when pressure rises, he said calmly. You relocate emotionally. You isolate. You decide alone. That kept him alive, she shot back. It did, he agreed. The agreement disarmed her. But we cannot build structure if you vanish every time the air shifts, he continued. If I am to provide stability, I need transparency. She searched his face. Transparency how? If someone watches too long, he said, you tell me. If someone contacts you, he continued, you document it. If fear resurfaces, he added more quietly, you do not shoulder it alone. Her throat tightened. You don't get control, she warned. I'm not asking for control, he said. He held her gaze. I'm asking for coordination. The distinction hung between them. He wasn't demanding custody. He wasn't demanding authority. He was asking for partnership. Therapy, she repeated softly. Yes. Structured integration. Yes. No sudden schedule changes. Yes. She hesitated. And you won't push him? She asked. I will not introduce myself as a storm, he said quietly. I will introduce myself as consistent. The word settled. Consistent, not dramatic, not possessive. She swallowed. And if he doesn't want you? She asked. The question was honest, not cruel. His voice didn't waver. Then I wait. That answer undid something inside her, because power rarely waited. But fathers might. She exhaled slowly. You don't get to scare him, she said softly. I won't. You don't get to teach him your world. Not unless he chooses to understand it when he's older. And you don't get to disappear again either, she added. Something flickered in his eyes at that. I won't, he said. The weight of it felt real, not theatrical, not promised for effect, just steady. The courthouse hallway outside had gone quiet. Their footsteps echoed faintly against polished floors. You understand, she said finally, that if I see even a hint of chaos near him... You walk away, he finished. She nodded. He met her eyes. And if I see even a hint of danger near him, he said evenly, I act. She held his gaze, not defiant, not afraid, just aware. For the first time since the storm years ago, they weren't arguing about love. They were negotiating safety. He extended his hand, not to claim, not to dominate, to seal. After a moment she took it. His grip was warm, grounded. This isn't forgiveness, she said quietly. I know. This is structure. Yes, she released his hand. And if you break it? He didn't hesitate. I lose everything. The simplicity of that truth lingered between them, not because he feared court orders, but because he understood what she meant. She turned toward the exit. He walked beside her, not in front, not behind, with her. And for the first time since the judge spoke the word confirmed, Elena understood something clearly. He hadn't demanded a child. He had accepted responsibility. But responsibility came with conditions. And this time, she wasn't running. She was negotiating the future. The final hearing did not feel dramatic. It felt inevitable. By the time they returned to court, the intimidation footage had been reviewed, phone records subpoenaed, and Mark's emergency concerns examined under a light bright enough to bleach excuses out of them. Elena sat straighter this time, not because she felt fearless, but because she was done folding inward. The judge entered with less tolerance than before. After reviewing new evidence, she began without ceremony, this court has determined that Mr. Reynolds's emergency petition was not filed solely out of concern for the child's welfare. Mark's jaw tightened. His attorney shifted beside him. The judge continued. There are documented communications between Mr. Reynolds and third parties connected to the individuals who approached Mrs. Reynolds outside this courthouse. A murmur rippled through the room. Elena didn't look at Mark. She didn't need to. You encouraged intimidation, the judge said flatly. You framed it as public concern. That is speculation, Mark snapped. It is corroborated, the judge replied sharply, and it demonstrates a willingness to leverage fear to influence custody. Silence fell like a curtain. The judge's tone cooled further. Effective immediately, Mr. Reynolds's custody rights are suspended pending supervised evaluation. Mark went pale. You can't. I can, she said evenly. And I am. The gavel struck once. Controlled. Decisive. A temporary restraining order is also granted, the judge added. You will have no unsupervised contact with the child until further review. Elena felt something inside her release. Not triumph. Relief. The kind that comes when a door finally closes on something that should have ended years ago. Mark's composure shattered quietly. He didn't yell. He didn't protest again. He just stared at her as if she had taken something from him. She held his gaze calmly. For the first time, she did not feel smaller. The judge turned to Allesio. Mr. Moretti, she said, voice measured, you will adhere strictly to the integration plan submitted. I will, he replied. No visible escalation, no security theatrics, no retaliation. I understand. Her eyes softened slightly as she looked between them. This child's life will not become a battleground. No, Elena said quietly. No, Allesio echoed. The gavel fell again. The case was not closed, but it had shifted. When they stepped outside the courthouse this time, there were still cameras, still whispers, but the tension felt different, contained, structured. The restraining order had changed the narrative. Mark was no longer a father fighting for rights. He was a man who had miscalculated. Allesio did not move to shield Elena from the view. He walked beside her, visible, accountable. Reporters called out questions. Mr. Moretti, what does this ruling mean for you? He paused, not long, just enough. It means I show up, he said calmly, within the law. And the child? Someone pressed. He remains a child, Allesio replied. Not an heir. Not leverage. Not scandal. A child. Elena felt her throat tighten. That night they sat at her kitchen table, not in a fortress, not in some guarded estate, but in the small apartment where she had built safety from routine. Their son colored quietly in the living room, humming under his breath. Allesio watched him without intrusion. No claiming, no dramatic announcement, just presence. I told him we'd be seeing you more, Elena said softly. And? He asked. He asked if you were good at building things. A faint, almost disbelieving smile touched his mouth. "I can build," he said. "Then build slowly," she replied. He nodded. "I will." She studied him carefully. "This is visible now," she said. "School events, court documents, foundation filings. Yes, you don't get to retreat when it's inconvenient." "I won't. You don't get to use him to send messages." "I won't." She held his gaze. "You don't get to be a father in name only." His expression shifted, something deeper than control settling in. "I won't," he said again. Their son padded into the kitchen holding a drawing. 3 figures, one taller, one smaller, one in between. "We're all here," he said proudly. Elena felt tears threaten. Allesio knelt slowly to his level. "Yes," he said gently. "We are." The child tilted his head. "You're not going to leave again, right?" The question was simple. Honest. Elena held her breath. Allesio did not rush his answer. "I will leave when you go to school," he said lightly, "and I will leave when you sleep." The boy giggled. "But I won't disappear." Not a vow shouted to impress. A promise calibrated to a child's understanding. Their son nodded, satisfied, and ran back to the living room. Elena watched him go. "Visibility," she murmured quietly, "with boundaries." Allesio stood slowly. "Yes." "And if the threats come back?" she asked. "They won't reach him," he said. "That's not what I asked." He met her eyes. "If they surface, I will end them legally," he said carefully, completely. She searched his face for the shadow of something darker. She didn't find it, only resolve. "I chose to stop hiding," she said softly. "And I chose to stop watching from a distance," he replied. Outside the window, the city hummed. Ordinary, unaware. But their life was no longer quiet in the same way. It was structured, documented, protected. Not by secrecy, by choice. Blood had confirmed connection, but it was action that would define fatherhood. And as Allesio stood in her kitchen, not as a myth, not as a threat, but as a man willing to show up within limits, Elena understood something with steady clarity. Love had once forced her to run. Now it required her to stand, not in shadows, not in fear, but in daylight, with boundaries strong enough to hold them all.